came back to make the catch for it.
Anderson has missed a field goal for the first time in 2 years.
Can't do nothing but get your roll on.
But now he Williams! Touchdown! That is a disgusting act.
Great cash, homie.
26-yard
Intercepted. I can't believe it.
missed it! The season can't end like that! It's a Minneapolis miracle!
71-yard touchdown. Bucky Justin Jefferson.
What's up, y'all? How you doing? My name is Dre, and this is the Painted Lines Skull Edition. Now let's get to talking about the Vikings and the second game of the 2021 season. Now this week, the Vikings are heading to
Arizona, a comedy beyond belief.
And while I do think it will be an uphill battle this week, I think the Vikings can pull out a W if they do these 5 things. Number 1 is stop with the dumb penalties. In the last game, including the 2 that were declined, there were 5 offensive holding calls and also 5 offensive false starts by CJ Ham, Brian O'Neill, KJ Osborne, and Tyler Conklin. On top of that, there were 2 other penalties that racked up to 116 yards. It really is hard to get anything going offensively when there are countless holding and false start penalties on top of everything else that can happen. And hopefully this was simply nerves and will be gone this week, because otherwise it can be a huge problem and really hurts the offensive line as a whole. Because number 2 is the offensive line needs to step up. Our offensive line is fairly dependent on 2 rookies who haven't really been playing, and then a second-year player in our center, Garrett Bradbury. And okay, so the reason why this is a big deal is because Chandler Jones, who had 5 sacks alone against the Tennessee Titans last week, went up against 3-time Pro Bowler Taylor Lewin. Now this week he is going to be blocked by Rashad Hill, who in the last game, respect where it's due, only allowed 2 pressures and then also 0 sacks, though he was also responsible for 3 penalties against Trey Hendrickson. Now this is a problem because Chandler Jones is a lot stronger than Hendrickson. Hopefully Darisaw can start playing soon, or they can use Hill and then get him help with the tight end that they now have and give Kirk more time, because last week Tannehill was pressured 31% of the time. He had a pocket time of 2.4 seconds and threw for 212 yards, whereas Kirk was pressured 33% of the time and had a pocket time of 2.2 seconds and he threw for 351 yards. Arguably though, if the penalties are less and Kirk gets a little bit more time to throw the ball, he'll be able to throw it accurately and use his wide receivers to their potential. Number 3 is take advantage of the Arizona secondary. Now the Cardinals defensive back Mario Wilson allowed 75% of the passes his way, while Brian Murphy only allowed 43 passes. However, he also allowed 8 yards a target. And these types of numbers are very similar to what Jefferson and Thielen did to the Bengals defense when Kirk had time. Now these 2 are arguably the best duo in the NFL right now, and even with a good amount of pressure, they did pretty decently against the Bengals defense. Now there is a concern obviously with Cardinals safeties Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson, who only allowed an average of 59% of the passes their way with an average of 3 yards. Kirk still threw for 351 yards with 36 completions on 49 attempts. And also Kirk did lead the Vikings downfield into field goal range to push overtime, despite starting at the 5-yard line with less than 2 minutes left in the game and no timeouts. Number 4 is get Cook going. And this can be in either way, whether it's the run game or the passing game. And the reason why that's significant is because the Cardinals were able to hold King Henry to only 58 yards rushing. Respect is due for that because he won the league's rushing title in each of the past 2 seasons, including rushing for the 5th highest total in NFL history last season with 2,027 yards. And from 2018 to 2020, he accumulated more rushing yards at 4,626 and 45 rushing touchdowns than any other player in the league. So this is immensely surprising that he hardly could make an impact in the lopsided game against the Cardinals. Now, Henry has a slightly different style than Cook. He tries to blow past his opponents with his long strides, which outstep and really outpace everyone else in the field. And this is why he has huge runs that have him breaking away from everyone. The problem is that when the defense loads the box and Derrick Henry's long legs do not allow him to get low enough to keep a low center of gravity to push the pile or really win head-on-head collisions in a short amount of time, it can hurt your average. And I say this even though I know for a fact that he would run over me just by breathing on me. I only say this because he has long legs, which can be easily points of contact quarterback in small space situations. As such, against the Cardinals, Derrick Henry was stopped 3 times on the goal line. Seemingly, Henry needs room to pick up speed and momentum while running. Now, Henry is arguably almost a one-trick pony when it comes to running and receiving. Last week, Cook had 6 catches out of 7 targets for 43 yards, whereas Henry had 3 catches out of 4 targets for only 19 yards. Now, Cook is well known for his receiving ability and is, relatively speaking, easy dump down for Kirk if he does not have the time, which, given how our offensive line is and given how good the defensive line is of the Cardinals, this is a high possibility that's going to happen. Now, last season, Cook's catch percentage was 81.4% compared to Henry's 61.3%. It's also worth noting that Minnesota had Thielen and Jefferson last year, so Cook's numbers, honestly, could be higher on another team. Additionally, by watching the two, many would think that Cook is more elusive with his agility and just simply by being a smaller guy. Now, last year, they were neck and neck with 33 and 34 broken tackles to him and Henry respectively. The difference is when you take into account that Cook had 66 fewer catches last season, not including the playoffs. That means that Cook breaks a tackle every 9.5 times he touches the ball, and Henry does that every 11.1 touches. So both backs are at the top of the league when you take into account power and elusiveness and then obviously scoring. However, Cook's impact as a receiver does lapse around Henry's, and because of this, Cook should produce better, or at least the same as he did versus the Bengals. And honestly, again, when it comes to the line of scrimmage, there's a high possibility that they're going to run our offensive line over. So Kirk needs to be able to throw the ball down to Cook, and frankly, that's a really good thing because of how good Cook is when he gets the ball in his hands, especially when he's in the open field. Arguably, we should have won the game versus the Bengals with the numbers, if not stolen at the last minute by the refs on that horrible call. Take that away, if Cook can do the same as last week, we have potential to win this game. Number 5 is everyone gets that Psquared Revenge game attitude. As I'm sure a lot of people know, after spending the first 10 years of his Hall of Fame worthy career in Arizona, the DB, the man, signed with Minnesota during this past offseason. Now, despite being slightly older, Peterson is going to come to play here. He's been saying it from the beginning, even though he tried to downplay it this week on his podcast, that he had some issues with some of the head office people when it came to his career ending in Arizona. And he's going to want to really put up numbers. He doesn't know how the crowd's going to react. Frankly, I think they should react positively. He did give a lot of good downs to them, and he deserves to be credited for that, even if it ended poorly, because he has no issues actually with the team itself, to my understanding at least. Now, I know I said in the recap of the last game that Peterson didn't get any balls thrown his way. He did have one pass thrown in his direct way, but it wasn't overtime, and arguably it wasn't that badly covered. It actually was a short screen to Chase right after the Dalvin Cook quote-unquote fumble late in overtime. But either way though, the DBs and mainly Bashaud Breeland did not do the best last week with the Bengals. And honestly, the Cardinals have a much better receiving core. Arguably, the Cards have the best receiver in the NFL right now with DeAndre Hopkins. The question is who do we put on their obvious number 1 receiver? So the Bengals' number 1 receiver is T. Higgins, which last week was mostly covered by Breeland, who unfortunately got burned by him a few times. Now, Breeland did cover Chase as well, who burned him too, but on the times that Higgins was covered by Peterson, he did not get a pass thrown his way. When it comes to Bashaud Breeland, I do think that he can rebound, obviously, but right now, based on what I saw last week, I think that we can't put him on Hop because he had a lot of issues, and if we put him on that, then Hop is going to run circles around him, and really, it's going to be hard. But here's the thing, Peterson knows him because he practiced with him for an entire season. And even so, with last season arguably being his lowest, Peterson was matched up with a lot of number 1 receivers, and he was still tied for first in Arizona's picks. He also had only 67.1 completions allowed, which in his career is arguably his worst, but that's still good, though fairly average among DBs. The one thing that's slightly scary though is that Jackrabbit Jenkins covered Hopkins last week when they played the Titans, and his completion rating was lower than Peterson's at 58.8%. 38. Now that's less than 10%, and Hopkins yet last week though caught 6 passes on 8 targets for 2 touchdowns and 83 yards. Having said that, the only 2 times that I could find that Hop and Peterson lined up on opposing teams in a regular season game was in 2013 and 2017. So in 2013, Hopkins got 6 receptions for 69 yards on 11 targets, whereas in 2017, he had 4 receptions for 76 yards and 1 touchdown on 9 targets. The difference being at the time, the quarterbacks throwing to him were Case Keenum and Tom Savage, respectively. For the most part, Peterson did cover him well. Now again, Peterson has some intel on how Hopkins plays as they lined up together for an entire season. Now, honestly, when it comes to the offense, Hopkins isn't the only receiver who can make plays. Christian Kirk caught 100% of the 5 targets that he had for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns. And also, Murray was able to spread the ball around to running back Chase Edmonds, 3rd wide receiver Rondo Moore, and the corpse of AJ Green a few times. So this is also why we need the defensive line to have that revenge attitude. Not only the Patrick Peterson revenge, but also the revenge for what happened last week. While we did all right, we need to get more active on it, because last game Murray was pressured only about 26% of the dropbacks that he had, and he still threw for 289 yards. Now, our defense was able to pressure Burrow about 34% of the time, and he threw for less than Murray at 261. Yes, Murray is more agile than Burrow, but Murray only had to scramble 1 out of the 9 pressures that he has, whereas Burrow went for 0 out of the 11 he had. Burrow was sacked 5 times and Murray was only sacked twice. Now, Murray had slightly more time in the pocket, so if we can get our defense to put more pressure on Murray and keep him in the pocket, it's possible that he won't have time to throw the ball to his receivers. So if everyone on the defense can just get that Peterson revenge attitude, there can be an upset with the Arizona Cardinals. Now for the score prediction, which was really close last week, which arguably was the right numbers, but it was just flipped from the actual numbers, and it probably would have been the actual score of the game had that fumble not had happened. So I'll do another Madden 22 Xbox Series X simulation, and it showed honestly a fairly defensive game up until the beginning of the 4th. It was 7-0, and then we never were able to get a touchdown, and we only got a field goal, and then they got 2 field goals. So it ended up just being kind of a weirdly defensive game, which I didn't expect. But if last week showed anything, the score will be flipped. So the final prediction score would be 13-3 Vikings over Cardinals. Having said that, I'm very hesitant to think that that's what's going to happen, but we'll see. Now, frankly, I am still worried about this game, but I am cautiously optimistic.
Let's keep a little optimism.
If we can do all 5 things, we can get the W and remain. Now let us know in the comment section your final score prediction and subscribe for more of the Painted Lines Goal Edition. You can also follow me on Twitter at Goal Edition and at The Painted Lines. You can also check out this podcast on multiple channels such as Spotify, Google Podcasts, and the like. Look out next week for the reaction to this game and the breakdown along with the Week 3 prediction. Until next time, Skol, let's go Vikings.